Hi everyone, welcome back to AMS Automotive Evolution. It's me, Christopher Ludwig. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for all of you tuned in to our opening of BMW, where I spoke repeatedly about pace of change, pace of transformation. That's a theme you're going to be hearing from us again and again throughout this event, and I think from many of our expert speakers and panelists, because as mentioned right at the beginning, we've rarely seen a faster pace of development in the automotive industry, whether it's the new products that are launching faster, whether it's the production of batteries and the evolution and change in batteries themselves, again, as well as integrating software and new technology into vehicles. And all of that is having a big impact on manufacturing. But underlying all of it, as I made the point this morning, are the partnerships, supplier relationships, co-development, which are ensuring that these changes happen to time, to budget, and to expectation. The automotive industry has very exacting and demanding standards, which take a lot of coordinated effort to ensure. And we see that no place more strongly than in manufacturing plants. Joining me this morning, shortly, to discuss this at length are two automotive manufacturing experts and leaders that I'm very happy could join us today and take my as well as your questions. The first of our panelists has had a long career at Volvo Cars in various manufacturing and leadership roles, including program leader for the then new XC SV90 vehicles, the SPA platform, led on final assembly in Gothenburg before taking on wider leadership roles, and more recently was also CEO of Zenuity, which was a autonomous software and ADAS company, also between Volvo and Autoliv. And since 2020 is the Chief Operating Officer of Polestar, where he oversees operations, product programs, and the wider ecosystem of relationships and partnerships across the supply chain and manufacturing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome to our panel Dennis Nobilis, the COO of Polestar. Hi, Dennis. Great to have you with us.
Hello, Chris. Thank you for inviting me and having me on the panel. Really appreciate it. And just as a note, I got tested positive for COVID yesterday. So if our voice is not carrying through properly, then that would be the reason.
Well, we will do our best not to overstrain, but we really appreciate you still spending some time with us, and of course demonstrating the resilience of automotive manufacturing and development in and of itself, despite the COVID positive test there. Still join us. So thank you again. Let me also introduce our other panelist who leads the motor vehicle division, automotive activities of Atlas Copco, quite important supplier in the automotive industry, highly focused on a number of systems and modules, including around battery housing and systems. Our panelist, our expert, leads on all areas of the automotive business, has worked at Atlas Copco for more than 20 years, and is also sitting on the board of several key software companies. Ladies and gentlemen, very pleased to welcome as well Lars Eklof from Atlas Copco.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me, and really nice to meet you, Dennis.
Thank you. Likewise, Lars.
My pleasure. Well, it's our pleasure to connect both of you, and again to pick up the topic that we're talking about today on partnership. So let's get right into it. I mean, I mentioned right up front about this fast pace of development, whether shorter time to market, changing technology, connectivity. Of course, there's other things in the mix there too, like regulations. But why don't you just get your views on how you feel that is impacting on manufacturing and operations for your company and the wider ecosystem? I'm going to turn to you first on that, Dennis.
Yes, I mean, the first response is, of course, right now that when you speak in operations, I mean, the semiconductor, the COVID lockdowns, everything that is happening means that you cannot have like a 10-day fixed plan and then you have a production schedule that matches that. It's totally impossible. I mean, if we can produce tomorrow, we would be very happy and we would do that. So I think the demands on flexibility on manufacturing is growing and it's really putting a strain on that. That's one topic. and then we go into then the R&D and getting new product launches, I also think that the flexibility is key. So for example, then we are foreseeing that in the future we'll be able to change chemistry on a battery every second year. Wow. And then we expect that to be properly handled in production, to have that kind of flexibility. So I think that is really part of it. So that would be my initial response to that.
That is, and when you're thinking about that pace of changing chemistries every second year, again, when we think about in more traditional automotive development cycles, which work on 5-7 year patterns and require lots of validation, I mean, moving at that pace is a significant shift. Lars, how about from your point of view?
No, but I would say exactly the same. I mean, it's a lot about flexibility, and I think about the speed of change. And when I think flexibility, I think what we hear from a lot of customers now, where they want to be able to build all models on all line, right? Because we don't know where technology is going. But I think also this with what Dennis touched upon on the no fixed plan. The environment is changing so fast, so this to really get closer to the customer, working, not as the traditional waterfall. Now I've done this, now I hand it over to somebody else, but really getting in and working in an agile fashion together, I think is very, very high up on our agenda.
So clearly that the way of working there is changing, and that the headline of our panel today is of course all about partnerships. And I wanted to get again a sense from each of you of how you're seeing that landscape evolve and change, because I'm sure it is changing as fast as the programs that you're both alluding to. So maybe I'll turn to you there first again, Dennis.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to partnership, we see a completely different set of partnerships coming into play. And this is much more the tech partner that we're working with. For example, then we're working with Google, we're working with Luminar, a new startup doing LiDARs, very complex products. And all this is coming now into play, into production and manufacturing as well. So I think they are not typically used to automotive demands. So I think there is a little bit of support that we need to do to make that happen. But I definitely see much more stronger play coming in from the tech and the innovation partner place. I mean, just on this slide, just to mention a few, I mentioned Google, Luminar, but we also have NVIDIA, typically in gaming before. Now we're moving more into automotive. So that is a clear shift. And then also with that, taking in that not so used to automotive demands, regulations, etc., which means that we need to cope with that also from a manufacturing perspective.
So there we see, as you mentioned, obviously not just these new names, but obviously new types of company on the software side, electronics, and that will bring, no doubt, different requirements for validation and other ways of working. But before we go into that a little bit more, maybe I'll also turn to you, Lars, from the supplier side in terms of partners you're working with, either with your customers or across the value stream.
No, I guess the key partnership in our world is, of course, with the end customer, where we try to get much closer and co-develop the solution, but also similar picture where we have the tech partners, in our case, working with cloud technology, with Microsoft, working with, let's say, 5G communications with Ericsson. So it's a lot more about trying to build, let's say, an infrastructure or an ecosystem where we are then, you can call it sensor agnostics. I mean, there is so much happening in 5G, for example, but at the same time, there's a lot of things happening in Wi-Fi 6. So for us, it's really important to build an infrastructure where we can keep the base. And just as Dennis, who wants to, let's say, change the battery chemistry every second year, I think from our side, we need to be ready to change, let's say, communication, if it's Wi-Fi, if it's 5G. So it's a lot of new learnings from us in that. What I would also add, something that I think is super exciting, is to work with the startups. So with new companies that are really in the forefront. It could be around artificial intelligence, etc., where we are then helping with the application domain and the understanding of the end application, and we're trying to accelerate how we can get access to new technologies faster.
So definitely shifts in the ecosystem there, as you both highlight. I wanted to come back to Dennis on I'm picking a little bit how some of this is impacting the way you plan production in the development phase of the vehicle, because as you outline, there's lots of these new players in the mix. Some of them for whom perhaps are not new companies, but are new to automotive at least. And therefore, I'm sure, need some, maybe hand-holding is the wrong word, but need to be supported in some areas to meet your requirements, and no doubt vice versa. So how does it change the way that you plan a production program?
That's a good question. I think, the initial one would be that we need a much tighter dialogue with those suppliers and with those partners. It's more partners than suppliers, actually. So a much tighter dialogue and explanation. This is the reason, this is the why behind it, that we would need to put in these kind of regulations or automotive requirements. I think that is a lot of task that we have taken on ourselves to be able to prepare for that. And when it comes to planning production, I do not think that is much difference in that respect. I think it's more in the upfront processes to secure that we get the right attention and the quality. And moving forward, then I think that launching with quality is one of the key enablers moving forward. And I think that this has been seen by many of our competitors, but this is a key advantage moving forward, to be able to launch a new car with quality from day one, and doing that in multiple plants at the same time in different regions.
So there's a sort of simultaneous launch but at the same level across locations. That's a very interesting point there indeed. Lars, as a manufacturing partner, and you mentioned earlier, I believe, the co-creations. Can you talk a little bit more about how that is working for Atlas Copco in this new landscape, in these upfront processes, as Dennis alluded to?
Well, I would say, traditionally, the way when we were talking about co-creation, it would be working towards a specification, and creating, let's say, mechanical solutions, or really making something happen in the plant. What we're doing a lot more now is to start much earlier with the customer, really starting at the architecture stage. And when I see what's happening now, it's more and more trending towards software. So the software share is a much bigger part. And then it's, of course, critical that we are able to integrate in the customer's ecosystem in a good way. So a lot of work on, let's say, building structure. Where do we go? How do we work? And I think also a big learning from our side to try to be much more transparent and to share with the customer really where are we in the project and how can we work together. So, we have examples now where we're, let's say, working together with customers to jointly try to secure components that are scarce for different applications, etc. So really collaborating in all different aspects. So a lot more than what we previously did, which again, I think is extremely interesting, and it really learns us a lot about the customer's reality and where we can add value and how we can increase the speed in getting stuff done.
And that's actually a good point if I jump in on that one. I think it's really good in the early phases to move away a little bit with the innovative partners from the detailed specification. This is what we need to deliver. More sharing the vision and mission, and say this is where we need to get to. How do we get there together, and what would be the right method and tools to achieve that? So I think that is much less from the past, detailed specification, to a more agile discussion, and then reaching high levels at the end.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I think it's an extremely exciting journey, and I think we, of course, we think we add value to the customer's process in this, but the customers really help us to get a lot faster and let's say, and really understand the true needs in this. So I think it's a true win-win from a, let's say, a supplier-customer type of a relationship in this, if we can become much more agile and work on a common end goal.
Lars, you mentioned earlier the opportunities around startups, so working with different types of players in the automotive industry. Of course, we could probably debate the degree to which Polestar we should consider a startup or a sort of a hybrid startup of sorts. But in general, for Lars, do you see different approaches to this agile way of working, co-creation in manufacturing between, say, startups versus more traditional players? And did you see some differences in that way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say, if we, to be open, if we would try to apply all the, let's say, the processes and the structures and how we would like to run projects to the startups, I think we'd fail in a lot of cases. We've tried that on a practical base as well. So I think really to understand, and as Dennis says, not really focusing on the process and on the gateways, but really what do you want to achieve and who can do what in the best way. So the way we see it, we have the, let's say, the early phase where we define the solution, and there we really try to be a lot more agile, working together with the startups, etc. And then, of course, when we get into the delivery phase, solutions nailed, and now we need to make it happen and to scale it. Then it's something else. That is much more of an efficiency, and that's where let's say, the processes and the project follow-ups and the gateways, etc., comes in. So I think a big learning for us on that, and really exciting. There's a lot of very competent people out there in the startup domain, even if they maybe not have the relevant background in our industry, but they are really leading the technologies in a lot of areas. So something that we're very interested in trying to expand on and how to get better at working with.
I think one area when we talk about partnerships and collaboration, we can extend that to an extent across companies themselves. And I think Polestar is an interesting example here within the context of Volvo and Geely, of course. Dennis, obviously, you're using shared vehicle architectures in whether it's SPA2, common production locations when we talk about China and soon the US. When it comes on to manufacturing, how do you work with your counterparts to sort of find that balance of synergies, differentiation, and across that? I mean, can you give us a little sense of how that works?
Yeah, no, that's good. Let me then give you first the context. So we have a different approach when it comes to manufacturing inside Polestar. So we're having what we call an asset-light approach. So many are talking now that they are perfectly vertical oriented, and that's what they go for. We're doing it differently. So we're using capacity in the plants of the larger Geely Volvo family to secure that we get some capacity that we would need, and then thereby getting the synergies, the economies of scale, and so on and so forth. But we need to be unique when it comes to the DNA of Polestar. So how do you achieve that? And we are trying to find our way there, but it starts with the design of the car. So we are owning the design of the car and also the user experience, the interface to the customers, and then also the dynamic handling of the car as such. What that means for the production is that we have unique suppliers going into the same plant, sharing the same platform as a Volvo or Geely or whatever, and in that then impacting the outcome of ultimately the experience of the customers and protecting our DNA. And that could count for, we do have some unique battery supplier, for example. I think maybe we'll touch upon that a little bit later. But in all, sharing the same platform gives us economy of scale. And then we have some unique suppliers just for Polestar going into the same flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is an interesting approach and a strategic one. And of course, design playing such a key role. I don't have to tell our audience the Polestar CEO, Thomas Ingolath, is of course quite a renowned designer in the industry, and now leading Polestar. So I'm sure that certainly creates some interesting perspectives there too. If we look to some of the more, let's say, front-end challenges that the industry is facing right now, semiconductors, material cost, inputs. I mean, the day-to-day that hopefully you can escape for a little bit to talk strategy with us here. But, how does that point to, or is that pointing to different ways to work with suppliers and partners, whether on a more long-term basis with transparency? I'll turn to you first on that, Dennis, although, of course, I'm interested, Lars, if your views there too.
Sure.
The last half year has completely changed the way that we look at the supply chain. Previously, I will not touch upon that, but what we do now is looking much more into robustness. securing that we have a robust supply chain is key. And we're also willing to invest more to get that robust supply chain. Now we're talking about geopolitical issues, we're talking about the semiconductor shortages, we're talking about COVID lockdowns, and also the war in Ukraine. All these things is just indicating one thing: go for more robust supply chain, and go and also invest in making that happen. If that is dual sourcing or if that is whatever that could be. But that is so key for us to move into that area. And when it comes to them working, for example, with the semiconductor shortages, then we think that having this partnership approach with the suppliers, sharing both the ups and downs of this area, then that would also secure that we get the supply and being prioritized when we have issues along the supply chain. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, yeah. And I'm sure that push towards robust, resilient supply chains, it must be a key initiative to also work with your wider counterparts across Geely and Volvo as well to again leverage those opportunities too. Lars, from your point of view.
No, I think, I mean, there is no let's say silver bullet solution to this. As Dennis points out, it's a lot about the robustness, and I fully agree with you. I mean, we are deliberately paying more for the robustness in the supply chain, be it price or dual sourcing setup. What I would emphasize, where we have focused as well, is on the transparency of the supply chain, and really see, not only get the delivery commitment from, let's say, from the circuit board manufacturer, but really, do they have all the components already? Do they have the allocation to that, to really demand that type of transparency? So again, it's about partnership and really, sharing the positives and the negatives in this. But what I think also for where we need to improve on our side is, and we worked a lot on this, is how do we handle last time buy, how do we handle components going out of life, etc. Because we see that the forewarning that we get when components go out is getting shorter. The life length of components is getting shorter. So it is something that we need to be much more active in doing all of this. And that, of course, creates a lot of demand for being faster to roll out new software versions, etc. And again, that ends up with a partnership with the customer, because when we are rolling out when we would roll out a new software version in Dennis's plants, then we need to verify that software in before. So what we would like to do now is to, let's say, kind of pre-verify the software, so that we would all, I mean, the idea would be to always have a software ready to roll out. I think the speed, we haven't touched upon it yet, but I mean, of something else that we see that's of a great concern, I would say, is on the IT security. How can we keep the IT security of the plants? And when we're now going into new communication strategies, be it 5G, Wi-Fi 6, of course, we need to make sure that we have the integrity there. And a big part of that is to work together on what is the type of firewall that we need, and also how can we get faster in deploying new software. I'd love to have the over-the-air software to let's say, on our equipment as well. Then the situation is more tricky, since it's integrated in a lot of different infrastructure on the customer side. But lots of good challenges for us there.
Indeed, and that does make me think. I know that the Polestar 3, Dennis, will have over-the-air updates, and we talk in the industry all the time about the software-defined car. But to Lars's point around data management, around validating software in advance around cybersecurity, it makes me wonder if we need as much software-defined production, software-defined plants as we do cars. Is that something you're already seeing happening? Does there need to be stronger emphasis on some of that data and software management across manufacturing as well?
I have not really seen that so big yet, but I definitely think that is needed. To a large point here, over-the-air updates, for example, for robotics, for the systems that you have also in the production. I mean, that would be expected at this time of age, absolutely, and greatly needed as well. because we need to be on the forefront of technology, and that's the way to secure it. And then, of course, you have the digital twins, etc. But I would say when production is running, to get that to the latest stage at all time is important, and will continue to be that. Not the less with the cybersecurity point that Lars also made.
And Lars, I mean, maybe just a quick follow-on onto that, to getting, because you mentioned obviously getting those OTAs, over-the-air updates to some of the equipment is a challenge because of the different places it's co-located. I mean, do you see solutions towards that, whether in the medium to long run? Is that cloud-based networks or things that would perhaps standardize and help for that? I mean, do you see a path to that, to solving that, or is it something the industry needs to really work on more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's clear that the cloud technology will enable a lot of positive things to happen. I guess where we're going, it would be very interesting to hear Dennis's thoughts on that as well. What I would suspect is that I would think our customers would typically go to a customer-specific cloud before they would go to, let's say, to running production critical equipment on let's say servers that they don't have control over. So in our case, it means that we need to work and to be able to deploy in the customer cloud. And I also think we're pushing a lot on automated test cases, etc., and standardized testing on everything we do. And here I think the next front borderline that we need to pass over is to start to shake hands with the customer and agree on, okay, how do we test not only to verify my software, but how do we test that to verify that my software works in your environment? And here, I guess the plans will be slightly different. If it's in Chengdu or if it's Charleston, I'm not sure if the IT backbone is exactly the same, etc. But obviously, when we deploy new functionality, we need to know that it's working in both facilities, right? So here, I think I think there's quite a lot of things to do.
Indeed. But as you mentioned, positive challenges, I think, to sort there. There's things we might expect as a given, but take some working out between the backbone of IT legacy systems and opportunities. And I look forward to covering more of that I'm sure with you guys as this develops. But turning back to you alluded to it, Dennis, to the digital twins. Is this especially as Polestar owns the design, and this is a key differentiator. Is this something you're using more of to manage changes and integrate into the manufacturing, whether in your group locations or with suppliers?
Yeah, I can take one example. I mean, we are building a plant at this very moment for the Polestar 5, the Polestar preset, as we call it. So we're building that plant. It's happening in China, and of course, then we build a digital twin of that plant. So we're building that up in a digital environment. And of course, that helps us a lot to be able to specify what will be needed at the end production. So I think that is what we're using. We're also looking into quite heavily what kind of smartness we can add to the factory. And what we believe could be interesting is also to see how we can connect the end consumer, the customer, into this plant environment and see how they can visualize and get their cars moving around the factory lines, and got already then start to build up this emotionally connected experience with the car to come, with their specific car to come. So that is also what we look into. Digital environment for sure, but also connecting the end consumer already in the production stage.
That's really interesting, and especially looking at the business models that Polestar and others across Geely and elsewhere in the industry are pursuing with more online ordering and connecting the customer to that process right down to manufacturing and design stage is really interesting. Lars, anything further you would add in terms of how digital twin simulation is changing or has changed the way you work with your customers?
Yeah, well, I guess, if you start with Dennis's perspective on the macro side, right, on the really big picture, where we're trying to come in is, to build, let's say, the digital twin of the tool, where you not only can simulate, can can this equipment stay up with the takt time or the quality demands or the accessibility, etc. But then to create a digital twin of the life length of the tool, what's the service history, what's the, let's say, what's happened to this equipment over time. And I think what I think is extremely interesting is to look at it on the true micro perspective then. So in our case, what's the digital twin of the joint, starting where, okay, this is what design wants to do, then how does this behave in reality? And then I think in the future, we should be able to maybe simulate, what will be the impact if I change screw coating or what have you, or if there's new suppliers because I guess the component suppliers in China and in the US will not be the same ones. So, let's simulate before we put it in production, what will happen then with the quality of the car when we have these changes. So I think also a lot of really exciting opportunities, not only to create, this digital model, but really I think the challenge where the true value is to keep it alive over the whole life of the car or over the factory or of the tool or of the tightening stuff.
I want to spend some of our remaining time unpicking battery areas of battery partnership and production with both of you. Firstly, turning to you, Dennis, you mentioned right at the beginning that ambition to change the chemistry every 2 years, or what the expectation is actually. I guess firstly, in terms of how you work with battery cell suppliers, I think you already alluded to the fact this is an area of some differentiation, perhaps within your partnerships with Volvo and Geely. How does that work?
I mean, first of all, we use the scale of the larger Volvo Geely family, which is positive. So we have a good relationship working with CATL and with LG Chem, and that is for Polestar 2 today. But we also are working on a separate note with SK On in Korea, and that is for the Precept car, the Polestar 5, because it's such a performance-oriented car. So then we actually said that, no, we would need a unique battery for that, because a lot of the power and performance and behavior of the car is actually in the battery. So there we have developed our own unique relationship. And then if you take that one more step, then we also realize that the cell chemistry as such, if you have the vehicle knowledge from how the customer actually used the car, and can then put that into the intelligence of the cell chemistry, then you can reach even further. So that we and Volvo really recognized and then developed a partnership with Northvolt. So there is now a joint venture between Volvo and Northvolt, developing a cell chemistry with all the vehicle knowledge from both Polestar and Volvo cars going into that one. So I think that is a unique approach that we are taking, and we hope that will benefit a lot for the end consumer at the end.
Very interesting, and I think what it perfectly encapsulates is that despite the need for scale in battery, there is this diversification of supplier partnerships to leverage not only the production capacity, but I'm sure the technology and the different requirements and those changing chemistries. And I think this approach is a really, really unique or interesting example across that. I want to turn to you, Lars, a bit more, because this is such a key core area for Atlas Copco in terms of how you're partnering and supporting it. Can you talk a bit about some of the key focus areas when it comes to the battery systems that require some new partnerships and focus?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And maybe now is a good time to put on the batteries process overview slide. Yeah, thanks. So as Dennis for sure, and I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience knows, the battery process as such, it's a very complex process. It's a process where it consists of quite a few different manufacturing steps where you have a lot of different technologies put in. And the trick then is really, when you go from taking the raw material, building the cells, putting everything together, etc. A lot of different technologies are involved, and in our case, we've been focusing a lot of trying to add more technologies that we can work with. But because, of course, from a customer point of view, what the customer is looking at is a process that is data-driven and where you will be able to optimize all of these different steps. And the challenge then, how do I optimize these steps where, there is some welding involved, there is some tightening involved, there is adhesive dispensing, etc. And how can we work on a data-driven way to continuously optimize the production in this case? So what we've done from our side is, well, clearly we've decided which technologies where we want to be in and which technologies that are not for us. But then, how can we work and make this happen on the production floor? So how can we take the data and the results from the customers and really, bring it out to somebody that's on the factory, and not just flag, here is something that might be something that's not okay, but how do we take this and really improve it? So I think this is a really exciting challenge, especially when you bring the different technologies together. And here it's a lot about, working with data lakes and let's say big data management, etc. But at the end of the day, it's to take the results into something tangible and then get this continuous process going with the customer, where we say, okay, well, this could improve, could this improve, and then how can we help to drive this over different plants, so that if we found an improvement in one plant, how can we implement that learning in another plant if applicable?
Yeah, and it is something we know that the cell quality and thermal management, many areas like this are very dependent on the production processes and optimizing and managing of that data. And I wondered if we might just go one deeper, or at least with an example, perhaps around an area like thermal management, which I know is such a key. Can you talk a little bit more about how this data-driven process optimization, for example, is applicable there?
Sure, happy to do so. So if we go to the next slide, then please. So if we take the case of the thermal management, we have let's say the battery backbone, which could be welded technologies or what have you, but it is a geometry that is not 100% fixed. Then what we need to do, we need to apply the conductive material that will ensure that the heat from the battery is dissipating. And I mean, this is a lot about the efficiency and the life length of the battery. So what we've done in this case, we're actually, instead of just using the traditional, what you see then on the right-hand side of the slide, where we have a vision-based system that is helping to, let's say, to put the conductive material on the right place, we're actually starting one station earlier. So if you'd run the animation again, please, Chris. So we're starting one stage earlier to the left-hand side there. So we start by measuring the actual battery geometry and then rapidly calculating, okay, how much material and where do we need to put it? So then each and every battery is optimized in this. And I think this is a really cool example, because at the end of the day, the customer in this case ended up saving 2 kilos of weight on the battery. Which I guess, I hope you agree with me, Chris, Dennis, that this is a big focus area for us all, right?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. No, that's a good example of doing it more custom designed.
Yeah. And I think also bringing together, not only the dispensing technology, but let's say vision technology and then optimization technologies into creating a lot of value at the customer. So I think this is a very interesting example.
It is, and we could definitely talk another couple of days straight on different areas of battery, and indeed many other areas. We've got about 5-6 minutes left, and as ever, there'll be more questions unanswered, and I look forward to following up with both of you on those. But I do want to turn a bit more to, we talked quite a bit in the front end of the discussion around attracting or working with new players, startups in the mix. And I just thought I'd like to be interested to hear how specifically, particularly for you, Dennis, to begin, how are you working in new ways to attract these sorts of partners and players into the ecosystem for your manufacturing and development?
That's good. So we have 2 approaches that is rather recent. One is Mobility X Lab, where we recognize that startups have an issue to work with larger companies. They need some kind of interface in between. So then we established Mobility X Lab, where 6 larger companies then are using one set of interface where we have all the IP prepared before, so the agreement, and then you invite startups to do a proof of concept with at least 2 of those larger companies. And then they run proof of concept for like 6 months, and then we exchange. So it's high pace, high turnover, and prepared interface, and making it easy to work for the startups with the larger companies. That's one approach. The second one is much more wider and broader in nature. And that is our Project Zero, which means that we're going to both produce a climate neutral car and also have a car consisting of climate neutral material. And that is by 2030. And I believe that we are unique in that sense, that we are focusing both on the production and the end result of the car with this material. And we have now done an open call to industry and startups and academia and inventors and what have you to join in on this task. And the uniqueness here is that we are not trying to reduce CO2 emissions, we're trying to eliminate it. So it's on a true zero approach. And here we have gotten several hundreds of approaches through an open call to the industry and inventors and so coming, yes, I know how we can close that gap down to zero. I have an idea how we can do it on that area. I think that is a unique approach from our end and something where we really need help. Because it's a big task to take on.
It is indeed, and we've shared the slide there just to give us a sense of that open call and some of the players involved. In fact, we're talking more about the Polestar Zero on Thursday with Dennis's colleague Hans Persson, who's leading that Polestar Zero, along with some of the other players you see there. Lars, from your side, I mean, particularly perhaps on the sustainability aspect, I'm sure that must be requiring you to also partner in different ways, new ways with players to meet those very ambitious goals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'd just like to raise my hand towards Dennis on the Polestar Zero. I think it's a fantastic initiative, and I think it's really something that's well needed. And you know, for us, the reality is very simple. We have more than 95% of our CO2 footprint is in the use of products. So of course we are doing our homework on our side. You know, we're looking into our production facilities. We're going for green electricity. We're going to, let's say, to try to use recycled material where possible, etc. So we have our homework to do for sure. But I mean, we're also committed to the science-based targets, and for us to make that happen, I mean, we really need to go to the use of products, to go with the customer. How can we do this? And I see a lot of great examples in that. I mean, one example is, for example, traditionally we'd have a tool, a box, and a cable, you know, to have like a physical controller sitting on the wall. So if we then replace this one, as we do with the latest, with a virtual controller, so a controller, software-based controller that's residing somewhere else. Now I actually save enough energy so I can drive my Polestar from Sweden over to visit Dennis in Gothenburg. So it's quite a considerable amount of energy that we can remove by just removing, let's say, the physical controller, which is like a computer that's always kept alive, right? So the energy going into the tightening is the same, but just this energy that we have in the controller, we can save a lot. So a lot of opportunities with new technologies in this. And I mean, everywhere I talk, both within the Atlas Copco, but also with customers and colleagues to Dennis, this is really high up on the agenda. So I'm very positive and see a lot of things happening here.
Excellent. I'm going to sneak in time for a last question to both of you. And you know, we've had some questions on the panel around autonomous driving and other things. So clearly, there's many other topics. But Dennis, what's for you the most important message you'd like to send to your suppliers or potential suppliers and partners, and how they can further help you achieve those goals? We've talked about electrification quite a bit here. We've talked battery, we've talked sustainability. As I mentioned, in the mix is also autonomous driving and further advances there too, new business models, the whole spectrum. What's the message you send to suppliers?
Good point. We will have autonomous driving in 2024, commercially available in California, together with our tech partners. So just on that note. But I think and of course you can mention flexibility and robustness, but when I have this opportunity to talk to this audience, I will probably emphasize that the true competitiveness comes with the true zero approach to sustainability and to the CO2 emissions. So becoming truly climate neutral, when we do that together, supplier and us and partnership, then you and us will get the competitive advantage versus all the other ones that is focusing on reducing CO2. And that will be the demand. And that will be such an advantage when you go to other OEMs and other partners in the industry. So I think that it would be my most important message. Go for elimination, go for true zero. And when we achieve that together, you will have such a competitive advantage, because how could you choose something else?
Yeah. I could barely think of a better mission vision for this audience. So thank you for those parting words from that side. Lars, from your side, where would you like to see, how would you like to see your supplier relations evolve further? What areas will help you achieve exactly what Dennis wants you to achieve with him?
At the end of the day, I think it's quite simple, really. We can't do this alone. None of us can, right? So if we try to do this together and really try to find a fashion where we can work much closer and much more of an integrated partnership kind of setup, then we can make it happen. And I guess we all owe this for our companies, but also for our families and for our kids. We really need to make this happen. So let's do this in an integrated partnership approach, would be my message, or my hope, I would say.
I want to thank both of you for spending this time with me. I've really enjoyed it. I think we've covered some great ground and really strategic points, lots of key takeaways and insights for our audience. It's really been a pleasure. I hope we can continue this discussion with us at AMS, and obviously more widely across the industry of partners that we brought together. We have plenty of opportunities coming up, so we really look forward to working with you on that. Thank you again so much, Dennis Nobelius, CEO of Polestar, and Lars Eklof, President of the Motor Vehicle Division at Atlas Copco. It's really been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Chris and Lars and the AMS team.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And thanks again to our audience for joining us. Look forward to talking further with these gentlemen, but stick around, because in 12 minutes, we're talking battery cell production and looking at more insight on how to scale that up. Part of an afternoon of battery insights. So don't miss it. We'll see you right back here soon on that. Thanks again for us in AMS.